Hi, Rabbi.
Okay, let's see if the Wi-Fi works. Okay, let's bring up the text. Hold on. Okay, we're going to be learning a talk, a little bit part of a talk actually, of Shabbos Parshiyos Lech Lecha, the 10th of Mar Cheshvan, which is today's the 10th of Mar Cheshvan, the year 1982. Not sure why I guess it's another. Hold on a second. It's a shame. Okay. So it says like this. Shabbos Parshiyos Lech Lecha Yud Mar Cheshvan Tashrim Beis. So from the year 1981 going into 82. The Rebbe says, "L'chura lo hayis richel iskayim isvadas b'Shabbos zu." The Rebbe says, seemingly, because we have very few actual farbrengens for the Shabbos Parshas Lech Lecha. So the Rebbe says that that we shouldn't be having a farbrengen for the Shabbos. But basically, there's no major occasion that's after the month of Tishrei, and the guests from the month of Tishrei have left. So it's even after the 7th of Cheshvan. 7th of Cheshvan is when we wait for the last guest to reach home in Eretz Yisrael, so we can start asking for rain. So it's already past that. So Shazel Hazman Shegia Achrin should be Yisrael in our pros, which that's when the last person would get to the Euphrates River, which is a sign that they've settled, and then we start asking for rain. So we're really post the holiday. So why are we bringing? Why are we having this gathering? The Rebbe says we know that though the idea of the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, meaning it took 2 weeks for the Jewish people who came to the temple to go home. So what's this have to do with today? Jewish people are not coming to the temple, though plenty of guests came to Eretz Yisrael. But still, maybe there's no this concept of the 7th of Mar Cheshvan today. But the thing is that it does exist. The Rebbe would quote this many times from the Shach, Shabsi Kohen in Shulchan Aruch, that if a person makes a commitment legally, halachically, on paper to someone to do something after the holiday. What's the definition of after the holiday? How do you define that? We're talking about 15 days after the holiday, which is Zayim Mar Cheshvan. And the Rebbe has a whole talk on this. Shabbos Parshas Lech Lecha Yud Mar Cheshvan. So if now we're in the 10th of Mar Cheshvan, we passed all ideas of the holiday. The Rebbe said there were people who I guess lived then and by the Rebbe who didn't think, hey Aaron, who didn't think that the Rebbe would make a hisvaidus of a brengen on the 10th of Mar Cheshvan. A person would think, oh, there's no farbrengen, so I could just relax. I don't have to come to the gathering, to this vadis, to the farbrengen. The Rebbe is kind of giving a bit of a jab. A person feels like, oh, you have to go to farbrengen, and I'm not in charge, and the scheduling, etc. The Rebbe says, nevertheless, although people thought there wouldn't be a farbrengen, and we're after Tishrei, and there aren't many farbrengens for the Shabbos Lech Lecha, the Rebbe says, Huchlot, it was decided, for whatever the reason is. The Archis Vadas, meaning the Rebbe is not going to articulate the reason why he decided to make a farbrengen. The Archis Vadas Gam Shabbos Zu, that we're going to have a farbrengen on Shabbos Lech Lecha, although it's even after the 7th of Cheshvan, so we really completed the holiday. Even though it kind of meddles with the schedule that was scheduled initially for the Shabbos, seeming to be this was a spontaneous farbrengen. If that's the case that we decided to make a farbrengen, it's obviously a good thing. Oberfrat specifically, kasher getoitza mitzvah dezu, the outcome of this bringing. It's going to bring to better behavior, so to say, better action. Just bring up the size of the text. Not just one good thing. Good things, plural. Like when it comes to good, something that's good, that's constantly growing. One idea grows to another idea. That it has effects, fruits that affect all generations. From the fact that the Rebbe decided to sit down on Shabbos afternoon in the year 1981 on Shabbos Lech Lecha, though there was no plan for Farbrengen and maybe there's plan to do other things, to sit down and make a Farbrengen. So this is the Rebbe's open statement to this gathering. Kasher Ma'avir Sedra, when a person goes through the Parsha, like Aaron here does the Shnai Mikra every week, it's a big thing now. And we open the Sedra, we open the Parsha, we remember that this week's Parsha is called Lech Lecha. Hainu, meaning to say, what does it mean Lech Lecha? That she'afal pi sheb'sedra yeshna ribinyanim, although there's many ideas in this week's Parsha, v'ilu tziveh HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'Avram Lech Lecha mi'aretzecha mi'ladetecha misuper rak b'psukim harishonim sheb'sedra, although the message of Lech Lecha means go. Yeah, God told Avraham he has to leave his parents' home. So that's only the opening statement of the Parsha. The Parsha discusses many other issues after that. Alpha became nevertheless, and this is a rule that the Rebbe always went by, that the name of the Parsha is an insight not just to the opening idea of the Parsha, but from the name of the Parsha we understand the entirety of the Parsha. The whole message of the Parsha is in the name. And nevertheless, Alpha became Nikras Kola Parsha, Kula B'Shem Lech Lecha. The entire Parsha is called Lech Lecha, although it only discusses the name Lech Lecha is only with regard, seemingly, opening idea of the Parsha, which is the idea of leaving his father's home. So this reminds a person and inspires a person that the very fact that there's many things that are going on in the Parsha, nevertheless, the name of the Parsha is Lech Lecha, inspires and it shows a person, reminds the person that the Avodah, what's the moment, what's the calling of the day is Lech Lecha. What's Lech Lecha mean? Lech Lecha means actually God told Avraham, Lech Lecha, go. Leave your father's home. Halicha mitis means Lech Lecha means a true go movement. Beyond any limitations. But in the message really, and like it's brought down the Likutei Torah that we've learned last year and other places, that the idea of Lech Lecha, go to yourself, means that Avram should become a person of movement in such a way that's much greater than any level he was holding before. God told him to Avram, it's time to elevate yourself on another whole level. Totally, another whole situation has to go on. And not just when it comes to the mundane, that you should be more careful and elevate the mundane on a higher level. The Ma'akim Ashkelon, that's obvious. A person may think, where could I find change? Where can I find elevation? Where can I integrate? The idea of Lech Lecha, of elevating things to a higher level, is in my mundane, things that are not holy, that I could do them a bit with a more holy attention, with a more holy consciousness. The Rebbe says, no, even the things that you do that are holy, the Kedusha, things that are godly, themselves have to be upgraded. Nidreshes, it's demanded from the person, he or she, ha'avodah de Lech Lecha. Grow, move within your spiritual growth. Aliyah v'hilach shbein haroich, and not just a movement, a little a nudge, a kind of a little position, but it should be shbein haroich, a totally different situation than you were before, even on your spiritual day-to-day life. So Isamaris, the Rebbe says, this means to say, let's just translate in action. Gam kasher avedasa ba'ofen dechol ma'adecha. If let's say we're talking about a person, but that person's avoda is b'chol ma'adecha, with all your might, means you've given everything you've got to God, b'chol ma'adecha, with all your might. Hine kasher misragav avodazu, but when you get used to this elevated level of service, so it's not enough to maintain it. That becomes your second nature. Even though you've given more than most people give, or you've given more than you're used to giving. Your mamish elevated your level, but you've become accustomed to it. That becomes your second nature. People get used to waking up early. After a while, that's who you are. I'm a person. I'm an early riser. Is brought down, not just the second nature, but netavastam, that becomes your nature. Second nature means it's not really you, but you've made it kind of you. Or you could even bring yourself to a level that becomes who you are now. Means a lot of us, we're getting a little older now, right? So we look back on our youth, things that we couldn't do. We've worked on ourselves to change it, hopefully for the positive. And once that becomes your nature and what you're accustomed to, like it says in chapter 15 of Tanya, you're no longer a person who serves God. You're not a servant. The servant's pushing themselves because then you're comfortable with your level now. You're what the Tanya describes in chapter 15, a person who doesn't serve God. Again, one has to look, Tanya Parak as well. Like I just said, like it says in Tanya chapter 15, where there the Alter Rebbe discusses, we're not talking about doing anything wrong. We're not talking about a person who's not even a Beinani. The person's a Beinani. The person's 100% good, but you're not an Oved Hashem. You're not a person who serves God. The definition of serves God is someone who pushes themselves. Once you've become accustomed to something, and even if it becomes your second nature or your nature, you're no longer pushing yourself. So you're not an Oved Elikim. Like it says in chapter 15 of Tanya, which talks about this issue, says, the Gemara, the Oved Elikim, what is a person, what's the definition of a person who serves God? It's not about doing Torah mitzvahs, it's not about even doing God forbid averos, transgressions. It's Hainu mi sheshayne pirkei me'ah pamim v'achad. If a person gets used to studying Torah, those days they didn't have text. So in order to remember the what they've studied, they had to repeat it over and over again. So those days, the custom was, if you learned something, you learned it 100 times. So 100 times, that was like a mamash complete. The number 100 is complete. But that's not pushing yourself. So what's the definition of pushing yourself? He quotes the Gemara. Someone who studies 101 times. What's the definition of a person who doesn't serve God? Not someone who studies something 1 time, 10 times, 30 times, 70 times. The difference is in that 1 time. Someone who studies the 100 times because that's what you're used to, that's not a person who serves God. When you go beyond your comfort zone, avodah is to go that extra time, that extra mile. Shezeh mishum should be in mayhem in the days of the Talmud. Haya regilis, the custom was l'shanis kol perek me'ah pamim. They study like the Rambam, like the Tanya says. They would study things 100 times. So that was what they were used to. Like that. So therefore, he's quoting the Tanya because that's what you're used to. So this extra 101 time, that one extra over the 100, how you say rather regilis, that's above what you're comfortable or accustomed to. Shehurgal min arv, that you've got used to from your youth of how you study 100 times. Shekula kenegat kulam, that 1 time is worth the whole 100 times. Liyes nikra ovid elikim, because that defines you as a servant of God. You went after what you went over beyond of what you're comfortable and what you're used to. That's the definition of ovid elikim. An ovid elikim is a person who goes past their comfort zone. Behine, the Rebbe explains, b'yamayim, in the times of the Talmud, haya regilis eshanis kol perek me'ah pamim, v'chein kasher loimid me'ah pamim ve'achad, because they were used to learning it 100 times. So when they do that 101 time, nikra ovid elikim, that's when you become a servant of God. Once you become accustomed, and that becomes your norm, to learn something 100 times. So the Rebbe says, sorry, what happens if you become that person that's always learning 101 times? So then your 101 becomes your 100. You can't just upgrade it once. Once the 101 becomes your comfort zone, so you're no longer Oved Elikim, when you're no longer a servant of God. When you learn 101 times, that becomes because that's your norm. And the Rebbe says in Tanya, it doesn't just mean that you don't get that crowning, that extra title of a servant of God. You actually get the title of Asher Lo Yavadei, a person who doesn't serve God. Once you've served God only out of your comfort zone, so you become a person who doesn't serve God. Again, we're not talking about sins here. Chapter 15 Tanya is a very important chapter of Tanya to study, where it talks over there about, it's a definition of servant. Servant means you're pushing yourself. Oived, someone who works on themselves. As we all know about ourselves. Once a person does something out of comfort of what you're used to, you don't have to toil. You don't have to work. You don't have to prepare. That becomes your nature. You're good at it. It becomes like cutting butter. So you're no longer a servant of God. When it comes to this thing, because this thing became your norm. What does this mean? And the Rebbe is going to introduce this idea to Lech Lecha. The Lech Lecha means to go, to move. It means whatever you've been comfortable until now, even in your holy progress. Once that becomes your norm, you have to Lech Lecha from that. You have to move further from that. The Rebbe was always into growing and growing. What's an example? A simple example. When a Jewish child is born to parents, that the parents, I'm assuming the Rebbe means, we'll see, their way of service is that they give all they got for Hashem. How take it from Yad Avraham. So this child, as soon as he or she comes out to the world, before the child has any idea of what is to be disgusted with bad and to choose good. This child, he or she, is raised in a house where he or she learns from the parents that this is a house where my parents do give it all they've got. Now this child grows up and you send this child to school. And that's the same schooling the child gets. Give everything you've got. Each child has to be taught according to their level. But nevertheless, in a Jewish home, they're teaching, give Hashem everything you've got. I mean, all your energy, all your focus. The child moves on from school. The person grows up, becomes an adult, and now lives in a place where everyone is serving Hashem. That's the atmosphere of the neighborhood. Again, it's not uncommon. You look around, you see people that you live around. That's the way they live. It's giving everything they got for Hashem. So then that child no longer it's not a big deal for that child, for that person now as an adult, that he or she lives giving all their might to Hashem, so to say, because that's what they were raised with from their parents. That's the schooling they got. That's the neighborhood they live in. That's the style of life he lives or she lives. It would never even occur to the child that there's any other way to live. The child never saw a different way of living. That who says I have to go to shul? Who says I have to give God all my might? I'm not even talking about doing right or wrong. We're talking about giving all your might. That's the education the child got. If that's what the kid was brought up with, that this is the norm for this child, this is the norm for his environment, her environment, there's no yagia here. There's no toiling here. He can't. The child can't even say, "This is my kav. This is my level that I reached." Kav echad b'vat. It's not even one portion of what you've attained because you've been raised in that environment. Why is it not your doing, so to say? Because you don't ask you. You were born to parents. That's how it is. You didn't choose it. If you chose it, it's something else. And also when he went to school, you go to school, the parents usually choose your school for you. And they chose a school along the line. I was talking on a high level over here, obviously, where the child also gets the education of what they believe in and what they live for. This applies to boys and to girls. Over Mela. The Rebbe is just saying, so therefore that becomes what's normal. That's the expected. That's the regular. The Parshiyos saying is a person may say, okay, I'm a person that lives in elevated level. The Rebbe says no. The Parshiyos says Lech Lecha, mi artzecha, mi ladetecha, mi beis avicha. Leave that what you're familiar with, from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's home. Here we're not talking about leave Terach's home. Terach, the father, the idol worshiper. We're talking about a house and a home and a land of holiness. Not just holiness, that live, so to say, parav. They're not, I want to upgrade, I want to give more. He or she was raised in a home, that they give everything they have for Hashem. Their parents live, their education is like that. But because you were born into it, that's your land, that's your birthplace. That's what you're accustomed to, that's your nature. Which what Tanya says, you're a person who hasn't started to serve God yet. So what do you have to do? You have to lechacha, go out of that. You have to elevate in a way of movement, not just a small pivot, but is beyond the gabi dargasa hakademis, according to the level that before you were holding. Totally out of your limitations. And a person may think, what do you mean? Look at the next person. How could you say that? How could you demand that from me? But the Rebbe says that's the message of Lecha. Lech Lecha has to be a message not to one type of person. Every person opens up the Chumash and learns Lech Lecha. It's a message to you. God is talking to you, Lech Lecha. And it's regardless, and Lech Lecha means become an Ovid. And becoming an Ovid means get out of your comfort zone, notwithstanding of the highest level of education or where you come from. As I said, the Rebbe says the point is, what we're saying here, is Nekudas Ha'ira, the Parshiyos Lecha. When we come to Parshiyos Lecha, what is the message that we're taking from Lech Lecha? Shegam kasher nimtzayim b'mayim d'matav nal b'yesem. The message of Lech Lecha is for everyone. And even if you look at yourself and you analyze yourself in honesty and in truthfully, and it is true, that you're on a high, elevated level. Midreshes aliyah v'hilach b'ofen shbein arach. God is telling you, nevertheless, you have to elevate and not just a pivot. You have to make a huge jump. The Rebbe says, "V'zeu gam seder haParshiyos Bereishis Lech Lecha." This is how the Parshiyos work. First is Bereishis, then is Noach, and then is Lech Lecha. The Rebbe is going to explain. Excuse me. Parshiyos Bereishis meduber. When it comes to Bereishis, we're talking about Klolis ha'avodah del barnash asik be'oiraisim kaimam. Bereishis is about creation and keeping the world in existence. What keeps the world in existence? The varnash, meaning it's an Aramaic term for a person, word enosh. So the varnash, a person, asik by raisa, occupies themselves with Torah. Because of that, the world stays in existence. That's why we say the vayechulu. On Friday night tonight, we're going to go to shul, and we're going to say the vayechulu, because when a person learns Torah, you become a partner in creation. So the first thing is the person studies Torah, and you're part of creation. That's Bereishis. Akvishin is bar le'il, like the Rebbe talked about in Shabbos Bereishis. Lashikasi b'drush Chassidus, when it says in the Chassidic discourses, shechidish v'isavas ha'elim m'shayidei avodas b'nei Yisrael hu b'dugmas ha'chidish v'isavas yesh mi'ayin. That when a person keeps the world in existence through his or her studying of Torah and doing b'mitzvahs, it's mamash in the level of recreating the world from something from nothing. Meaning the Jewish people, through our service, through our doing of Torah mitzvahs, that we're affecting, that there should be Shemaim Chadash and Veretz Chadasha. The world is being renewed constantly through our avodah of Torah mitzvahs. Again, one has to look more in details on the talk that Rebbe spoke that year, 1981, at the end of 81, Tavshim and Beis, on Shabbos Bereishis. So the first thing is Bereishis is that when you study Torah, you do your avodah, you're keeping the world in existence. You're recreating the world. After Bereishis, but Parshas Noach comes the next Parsha, Noach. The difference between Bereishis and Noach is like the difference between the avodah, the service of a righteous person who's keeping the world in existence, recreating the world, and Noach, right? The world goes through a big mabel, through a flood, which is like the avodah of the Baal Tshuva. Babir Bezad, the Rebbe explains that Parsha Bereishis and Yana Bereishis is Priyas Olam, creating the world. Olam Amiluya Nivra, the world was created perfect, so to say. Of course, we learned in the Maimon Torah or there has to be tikkun, but in all, the world was created Al Miluya, complete. That's the avodah of a tzaddik. Halikim Asas Adam Yashar, that's the light of the direct light. Yashar, do everything what you're supposed to do. Recreate the world constantly with your Torah mitzvahs. Sheklas in the Bris Olam Kashim Avodah Tshuva. Ki Bris Olam Hatikun Hoysel Acher Shvir Sakem Shbail Matay. Although then Chassidus and Kabbalah brings down that creation of man is connected in general. The creation of the world is connected to Baal Tshuva because the world was created after the breaking of the vessels, and the sparks fall down, and we have to fix it. That's what we learned to Maimer L'Saka, and that's why first man wasn't created circumcised. Adam wasn't created. Avraham wasn't created circumcised. L'chein harizah kosher im klasin in the Avodah Tshuva. That's Tshuva, making the world L'Saka, Tikkun, to fix the world. Lahashiv had nitzutzes, to find the sparks shenaflu b'shviris hakelim, that fell in the breaking of the vessels. V'zeh klaus in the seisra amanas livnois. The idea of God destroyed the vessels so we could rebuild them. Binyan olam hatikun, building the world of fix, of completion. V'dugmas klaus in the Avodah Tshuva, which means Tshuva. So seemingly, even Bereishis is Tshuva. Why are we saying Bereishis is tzaddik, is the righteous person, and only Noach is Tshuva, is repentance? Av'alf pikein, nevertheless, the Rebbe says. Avi pashis anyanim. But if you look at it from simple point of view, not from the Kabbalistic point of view, moving is understood. Sheparshis Bereishis kshura im klalius ha'inin devotes tzaddikim. Bereishis is tzaddikim. Again, a tzaddik also has to do avodah. Because it says the world was created more or less complete. God made a person to be straight. Just do what you have to do. Maintain the pace. Comes Noach. That the waters of Noach, which is the flood waters, gives salvation, but it's that salvation through the flood. Like it's brought down in the talks of Chassidus. This is what we said, we learned before, that it's the idea of the calmness that Noach brings to the upper and lower worlds. But that's only after. First, the world went through chaos, all the destruction that the generations before the flood did. In Yana Bilti Return, things that were negative. Means Nach, we see real tshuva. Means the world literally was flooded. The calmness is the elevation we get from fixing the destruction of the flood. That's the avodah of the Baal Tshuva. So here we see in the more practical and the more simplistic way of looking at the story. Bereishis, you see perfection. Comes the flood because of our actions. So the fixing of that through Noach is a Baal Tshuva. Like it's brought down in the teachings. You read this like we've learned in the Torah, that the 40 days is like the 40 measurements required for the waters of the mikvah. The world needed to be purified. Because the mabul, the flood, was there to cleanse the world of its impurities, because of the actions that the people did. Like it says, who makes us pure? God makes us pure. This is tshuva. So it's clear, Noach is an avodah of tshuva. Avodah tshuva, the Parshiyos Noach, and what did Noach do? This is actually something that, if you think about it, how did he do tshuva? One of the things he did was that after he came out of the ark, he took the animals that were survived. I mean, not all of them, but some of the animals that survived the flood. Meaning, these were animals that lived in the world before the flood. They weren't born afterwards. So he was able to take things that lived in the world that God said this is a world that is full of destruction. He was able to turn it into a sacrifice. That symbolizes the transition, that through the avodah of Noach of tshuva. And it wasn't just that he did tshuva on himself, but it affected God. And when God smelled the aroma of the sacrifice, he recognized the tshuva of Noach, and he says he's not going to destroy the world again. And therefore God made a commitment to himself. He's not going to again destroy the world like this, like a flood. Which is a covenant, a promise. That through the tshuva that the world did not have when it was first created, the proof is that there was a flood afterwards. So Noach was able to, through his tshuva, accomplish something that the world on its own didn't have. That God made a covenant that he's never going to destroy the world again. In Nitzchis, the everlasting life, so to say, span of the world until the amount that it was given. We learned the world is 6,000 years, but not the kind of destruction of the flood. So we see here it's an amazing thing. That there's something that the world didn't have on its own, Noach was able to accomplish by taking animals from before the flood and sacrificing it, which is symbolizes the idea of transformation. He transformed the world through tshuva to bring an everlasting energy into creation. That's the power of tshuva. That's the Or Chayzer, the reflecting light. That's why it says the Baal Tshuva stands on a level that the righteous can't stand, because the righteous stood in the Parsha Bereishis, but that didn't affect the world. That the world should not be destroyed. Comes bad behavior, and all of a sudden their good deeds gets washed away. And weird, how did Noach get, so to say, effect that God should commit himself to the everlasting life of the world, is because it's the idea of nitzchias, everlasting, is connected to tshuva, and the explanation is it's brought down as a preface to Avos of the Mishnayos, which is Milad de Chassidus. We learn in the Avos, the tractate of Avos in the Mishnah. That the Rambam says you can't compare the Baal Tshuva, who's been there in the world of impurity, tasted the taste of sin, and now has to work to conquer his or her Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, whereas the tzaddik was never tested with that. There's no telling how the tzaddik would behave. There's no consistency. You need to fall and get up in order to see your level of resilience. If a person is just always good, always good, always good, we don't know how that person would perform if he or she did fell down. So we don't have the Tamidus, we don't have the everlasting, because there's a certain level of uncertainty, because you never experienced the negative. You never were tested. So how could we say for sure we know how this person would behave if he or she was put into such a test, or did have the temptations of the Rasha, of the person who sinned? The Baal Tshuva tasted the taste of sin. And now he or she changed. And now they identified their Yetzer Hara and they're able to conquer it. So therefore the avoid is totally different. This is based on the teachings of the Rambam. So you can't compare the avoid of the tshuva, the person who returned, to the person who's the tzaddik, the righteous. Dugma David, the Rebbe says an example. It's brought down. If you have a document that's a contract on file, so it's good. We're assuming it's good. Everything's in order. But if you have a contract that someone protested against and said, no, this is not a legitimate contract, there's something wrong with it, and it was investigated and found to be legitimate, so the shtar sheyatze iruv v'niskayim bebezdin. So if you have a document that someone was ma'over, someone says, no, it's fake, it's false, and it went to the courts, and the courts checked and said, no, it's a good document. That document is so much stronger than a document that we assume is good, that no one ever protested against it. And therefore the law is you can never question that document again.
I thought Noah, though, was selected in the rest of, Noah and his family. The rest of the people who had sinned were killed, but he was considered righteous.
Excellent question. Excellent question. That's on a personal level of Noach. But as far as the transition of the world went through a process. Means yes, you're right. It's a very good. It's a very good point. You're saying that Noach was the tzaddik, and the tzaddik Hayibedei and he lived through it, and he started his family. But that's Noach isolated as an individual. But if you're talking about how the process of the world, the God could have, like the question we learned in the Torah, God could have created and recreated a new world. He wanted that this world that went through the difficulties that it went through before the flood should go through the transition. So Noach maybe was the facilitator, but we're talking about from the viewpoint of the world as a whole. It's a good question. So the Vidugma Davar. So he says, yeah, so the halach is you can never question that document again. Before, one questions the document. We assume it's good. And Torah says it's a good document. Nevertheless, although the document is good, and you could collect and use the document according to Torah, it's a document, and the Torah accepts the document, has witnesses, all the qualifications. But it still has one thing. Someone could come and say that there's something wrong. It's fake. It's false. It's forged. But once someone does claim that it's wrong, it's a fake document, and the courts check it and see that it's legitimate, you can never question the document again. Once the Bezdin checks into it because someone claimed that it's to be false or forged, then no longer could you question the document. That's the law. So too over here. Only after the Baal Tshuva has been tested, fell once, and now identified his or her Yetzer Hara and is able to conquer it and to control it, and now you become a Baal Tshuva, a person of return. Now you have that kind of consistency that you didn't have before because you have tested and you've come around. So therefore, what do we have from Noah? That after the flood we got this consistency in creation is only because of the process of tshuva. And that since Noach represents the avodah that the world went through a tshuva, a return, a cleansing from dirt, so therefore there's a consistency in Parshas Noach that's higher than Parshas Bereishis. So now, after a person's holding Noach, so we went through this elevation, through the challenges of Noach, and we've come through, and we've elevated to level Baal Tshuva. So we have both avodas. We have Parshas Bereishis, which represents the tzaddik, and Parshas Noach that represents the Baal Tshuva. Then not only is it that you've gone through that process, once being a tzaddik, then going, or simultaneously in your level of a tzaddik, simultaneously in your level of the Baal Tshuva. Parshas Bereishis Avodas Tzaddikim, you've affected the world. The Chol So'ilam, not the world has gone through that transition. Parshas Noach, the Avodah Baal Tshuva, for the world. A person may think, what's greater than this? We have consistency, we have balance, we have strength. Then we come to Parshas Lech Lecha. So we tell the Jew, we tell the Yid, you need to go away from all of that. Leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your father's home. A person may think, wow, I got through Bereishis, I got through Noach, I have the full balance in life. I've experienced the tzaddik, I experienced the Baal Tshuva. I started off with the righteous, I went through the issues, I've overcome them, I'm a stronger person now. And comes Parshas Lech Lecha and says, no, you need to go totally away from that. Now you start your growth. So I say meres, that means to say that after the whole month of Tishrei, Isis Reishis, like we said before, is like the word of beginning. We've accomplished everything. We've brought the blessings that we need for the material and the spiritual. And the whole year. Comes the next month. We start to unpack everything we've brought, right? The example given by, I think, the Rebbe Rashab is that going to the month of Tishrei is like going to the market. You go to the market, you shop for this, you shop for that, you shop for this. So that's like Tishrei. You're getting all the things you need for the year. And a little spirituality, and Chassidus, and Torah, and mitzvahs, of Parnasa, everything you need, health. You gather it all in the month of Tishrei. And comes Chesh, when you come home, men packt vernande discheur. You have to unpack the goods. Was man hat handelt and eingekauft Meshach Chodesh Tishrei. What you negotiated and bought and purchased over the month of Tishrei. You've negotiated for yourself a whole year of goodies and blessings. Now you got to unpack it. You do a Piskin Rabbeinu Sienu, like the Rebbes have explained about what's the month of Cheshvan. So now comes Lech Lecha. We're after Tishrei, we're after Zayin Cheshvan. We open up the Torah and say, what is the message of this week? God's telling us Lech Lecha. We have to live with the message. Excuse me, Ketaris Admar Zaken, as the Alter Rebbe says, Hayidua, the known the teaching of the Alter Rebbe. A person has to live with the message of the week. Now we get the lesson going forward in the year, now that we've already come back from the market of Tishrei, and we unpack the bags. Don't get comfortable. Don't unpack and just say we're maintaining things. We've went through this exhausting process. A person may think of Bereishis, a flood, the after flood, the tshuva. No, Lech Lecha. You have to start moving in a way that's beyond anything. Like we said before, what could be all your might yesterday becomes your second nature. You have to go away from that. The Rebbe was very into no small pivots, totally out of your comfort zone. Like it's brought down in the Torah in the beginning of Parshiyos Lech Lecha. That Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, chose carefully. There was many teachings of the Alter Rebbe. He chose carefully which teachings should be for which parshas, etc. And this that we see in Avraham constantly. Once he comes to Eretz Canaan, he was moving constantly. We have the from above down, and from below up. As the Tzemach Tzedek explains, and it says in the Torah, Avram hu Sicha and Kol Rayin. It's a brilliant concept the Rebbe talks about throughout the years. That we have the two extremes here. We have what it says in Torah, that Avram is so high, he's Avram, Av his father, which indicates the highest level of Chachma, and that itself is Ram, is elevated, which is called in Chassidus and Kabbalah Seichel Anel Mikol Rayin. We learned about this in the years previously. An idea that's so deep in so high within the person that there's no ideas to articulate it. And God says to Avram, go from Avram down to this world. Bring that message down. You can't stay in an isolated space in your own comfort zone. To the core of the Father, of Chachma, the beginning of everything. Go all the way down to the world of revelation. And if you want to know what's going to happen, then you want to really find out who you are. This is the message of Lech Lecha. You will find out who you really are only when you go down. They'll get out of your high space and bring that message down to the world. And then you'll find out who you really are. It means that Avram elevates. He's not compromising. It's an elevation for Avram to go down. In a much higher level. It's even much greater than the intellect that's beyond any idea. And that means also from below up. Here the Rebbe says that even if a person, that even when you're in a space of low, that by being in a low space, like we learned last week in Noach, is that specifically there is how you get elevation. It's explained many times. This is another principle that the Rebbe teaches many times. And it's based on the teaching of Yisalachti, that there's movement that goes both ways. When you have a parsha that has a name, Lech Lecha, and two people seemingly can take the message separately. One person, Lech Lecha, means to get out of my dark place. And one person, Lech Lecha, means to get out of my light place and to spread the light. But the fact that both messages are on the same word, that both Lech Lecha means simultaneously two things, going from below up, and seemingly it's two opposite ideas. One person is in a mamish in Terach's home, and you have to run away from that. And the other person has this, God's telling him or her, don't lock yourself up in your base medrash and go out and teach a message. The very fact that the message is in the same word of Lech Lecha, they're not separate messages. They're connected. It's one thing. Kimeduver kam poem oides harayil davar mipirish tevis shatnis sirf gimlin yanim the shua tavi v'nois. One of the examples is given. The idea of shatnis is the clothing that you're not allowed to sew together the wool and the law of wool and linen, etc. So let's just finish off a few more words. Vapiza moving. Goydel ila the Parshiyos Lech Lecha. She'azin dreshes avoid the boyfriend aliyah v'hilach shveina reich. And that's the message of Lech Lecha. And the Rebbe continued with this idea earlier years and later years of it's not just two different people that are on the same message. It could be the same person that's getting the message that has to do both things simultaneously. Some parts of ourselves we're bringing down, some parts of ourselves we're running away. We have to run upwards. Vapiza moving goydel ila the Parshiyos Lech Lecha. Now we understand Lech Lecha. It's not that you've survived the flood. You're past the flood. That's last week. But that's last week. That's the whole point. It's last week. This week is Lech Lecha. You become a whole other person, a person who has the ability to move in such a way. The Rebbe says that's why I made a farbrengen. Although Lech Lecha usually the Rebbe did not farbrengen, and people thought the Rebbe would not farbrengen. The Rebbe says, I guess the Rebbe sensed there needs to be an awakening. Oidis is asking spinning Shazman Grama Boyfin the Hilach Shvena Reich Lagaba Boyfin is asking Bezer Ba'over. And the Rebbe says, I'm going to finish off over here, where the Rebbe starts to give maybe a little bit of critique, that he saw that there has to be a reminder and an awakening and an inspiration that no matter what people have done up until now, you got to double down. Lech Lecha means never get comfortable. Always looking for growth, always looking for not just a pivot, but mamish to take things to a new level on a constant and consistent basis. The Rebbe evidently continues with this message throughout the farbrengen. All those could learn the rest of this beautiful farbrengen on their own. Thank you all for joining. And Laila Tov, I'm not sure who those who are watching on YouTube, I made a little bit of a mistake when I started it. It could be the link changed. So if some people were trying to get on and didn't, could be that's the reason. Laila Tov and good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.